Once again, Jay, excellent job.
Thanks.
Thank you again for joining us here and being one of our expert co-hosts. I've got some questions for you. We're gonna probe the great mind of Jay Baer and try to get some insights, some extra insights for you guys. Again, if you have extra questions for any of our speakers, use the Facebook group, use Twitter, and we're going to be sharing as much content as we can from all these sessions to you guys through email, so just pay attention to that. So up first, one of my first questions I love always, when did you get onto Twitter?
March 2008.
That's very specific. That's good. And how did that happen?
You know, I was running a digital marketing agency, and our specialty was in email and conversion rate optimization and landing pages and that kind of thing. And somebody on my team was starting to use social to sort of broaden the base of awareness that we were creating for our clients. And I was like, yeah, this is kind of interesting. He had been on Twitter since I think maybe a few months before that. He's like, yeah, you should just kind of check this out. And I went back and used Time Hop or whatever, and you know, my first tweet is something like, I'm eating jelly beans or something like it's really piercing insight. Yeah, so
yes.
Many of us.
What was the engagement rate on that tweet?
The engagement rate on that was not great. That should be the introductions next year from Nick, is the first tweet we ever sent. That should be the intro.
We definitely looked into that,
yeah,
so we're gonna be doing that at some point in the future.
I like it.
All right, so building on that, another great question is, when did you realize that you were working in social media?
That's funny. I started Convince and Convert 6 years ago, and before this company, I had another digital firm. This is my 5th digital company that I've ran, and I started this company, and I called it Convince and Convert because I was going to specialize in conversion rate optimization and kind of helping people improve their lead gen and that kind of thing. And so I started a blog, and I'd never had a blog in the past. I'd done a lot of magazine writing, and I started writing a blog post every day. And so I'd write about email, and I'd write about conversion rates and headlines, and every once in a while I'd write about social media just because I thought it was interesting, and I was starting to play with it more. And I realized that every time I wrote a blog post about social media, it went crazy. And every time I wrote a blog post about anything else, it did okay. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Maybe I should write more of that. And so I just started to write more and more about social media, and then eventually I started getting a bunch of social media clients and opportunities, and fast forward 6 years, and here we are.
Excellent. I find the same thing about bacon. The more I write about bacon,
you know what?
So I don't know if maybe social
Google
Fresh
doesn't
should.
lie. That's right.
Yeah. All right. Excellent. I think if you guys have not checked out Convince and Convert, just a quick plug for that. I love the Convince and Convert blog. I think it's one of the best out there. I would put it up there with socialfresh.com. I don't know if you know that one, but I think definitely check out Jay's blog if you haven't.
I agree. Social Fresh is amazing.
So 2 plugs there. Sorry about that. Right back to back. So so you started in that direction. You came to social. You've built kind of an agency now at Convince and Convert, which I think is really cool. And it's a little bit of a different model for an agency. Can you speak to that and what you guys do and how that works?
So it's really a consulting firm. We'll probably operate more like a McKinsey or something like that, or even maybe an Altimeter group than an agency. Everybody on my team, there's 8 of us now, virtually located throughout the U.S., and everybody has come from an agency background at some point. But we don't do agency things. Like, we don't do execution stuff. So we really do social media strategic plans, content marketing strategic plans, competitive audits, and then we do a lot of ongoing advice and counsel. So many of our clients are on retainer with us, where they call and ask us to plus up things that they're already doing. So 100% of the companies we work with have one or more agencies.
Yeah.
And so we have no desire to take business away from good agencies. We're just trying to kind of do 1 + 1 = 3. And fortunately, we've got some clients here at Social Fresh and some sponsors and things like that. So we have very intentionally said, look, we're going to build a different mousetrap, and it's worked well.
Yeah, and I think it always helps to have a new, fresh voice come through, sometimes even if you are a social media agency or a PR agency, to have that different perspective.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of great things from the work you guys do. What do you think are some of your favorite situations to be in? Like, if you have a new client come to you, what's the favorite situation that they
that's a great question. We also do a lot of work for agencies. We are on retainer with a number of agencies, integrated firms, PR firms. I like that challenge a lot, having so much agency background myself. Helping them package and price and staff and sell social services to their clients. I personally like that challenge a lot.
Yeah.
It's not as sexy as some of the work we do for big brands, but personally I like it, saying, look, here's your agency now, here's where your agency can go, here's how you get there. I think that's really fascinating. And then on the corporate side, the kind of stuff that we're doing with Chris at Oracle and people like that, sort of taking content and atomizing it, as I mentioned a minute ago, repackaging it, and then also we do a lot of metrics work, a lot of helping people improve their success metrics and tie them back to
process.
Business. Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome. So I think one of the reasons you're really good at that is because you've been doing this for a long time. I don't know how many other people have had 5 internet marketing firms in the room, but so speak to that experience for a minute. I think you might be the only person that has been doing internet marketing since maybe before the internet.
Before Yahoo, before the browser, before the graphical browser. Late 93 is when I started, and
I think there are people that are born in 93.
Yeah, probably so. And I'd like to say that I had like this great epiphany, like this is going to be the future, get on the bus. That's not true. What actually happened is that I was working for the Arizona Department of Juvenile Corrections. I was the spokesman for
Common
the
path
department, which is so my job was to give tours of the juvenile prison, which sounds great and was even worse. And I'm also not really a government guy, I discovered. And some friends of mine from college, University of Arizona, go Wildcats, had started the very first internet company in Arizona, first ever. And we were having beers, and they said, hey, this company's getting kind of big, and we don't know anything about marketing. And I said, well, that's good, because when you say the word internet, I don't know what that word means. I literally had no idea what they were talking about. But I said, you know what? I will do any job, literally any job, to not give another tour of this prison. And so I walked in the next day and quit. And so I ended up, true story, I was the vice president of marketing for an internet company, and I'd never been on the internet or seen it. So that was
the day after you were giving tours.
Yeah, so that was an interesting sort of ramp up. And I've only done 2 good things ever in my life, 2 smart things. Convinced my wife to marry me, and it did take a lot of convincing, and accidentally got a job on the internet and never got out.
That's amazing. I love that. That's a great story. So, Social Pros podcast, we gave a shout out to earlier.
Thank you.
I'm a big listener. Love it. Download it every week. And Nick Cicero does a great job co-hosting with you. I'd like to know kind of the genesis of how that came about. I think there's a lot of podcasts starting now. And is it the same now as when you decided to do the podcast? Is the business case the same, and how does that kind of change?
That's a really good question. It has somewhat of a funny parallel to my juvenile correction story. I did not...
was it originally a juvenile
It was originally a juvenile
podcast?
correction. It was originally a prison podcast. It was not. But I did not necessarily seek to do a podcast. At the time, Argyle Social, which is no longer in business, but one of my favorite social media marketing tools from days gone by, they were a sponsor of the Convince and Convert blog, and they said, hey, do you want to start a podcast? And I said, yeah, maybe, sure, okay, if you guys want to do that. And so we just started let's just do a show. And Eric Boggs, who was their CEO, and I originally hosted the show. And we said from the very beginning, we want to create a podcast that isn't about you and me and other kind of consultants or faces, if you will, in social media. We want to create a show that shines the spotlight on people who actually do work, which is why the tagline of the show it was and still is the podcast for real people doing real work in social media. And that's why every week we interview somebody who is a social media manager for a major brand and talk about inside baseball. Like, what is it really like to manage the social media for PGA Tour or Dunkin' Brands or some of the speakers here have been on the show, and really get into the weeds and the nitty gritty. It's also great because it just allows me to build relationships with people who at some point I might want to work with on a project, or maybe they could someday be a client or somebody just hang out with. I tell our clients this all the time. If you have a podcast or any sort of ongoing content series, it's so much easier to cold email somebody or tweet them and say, hey, would you like to be on my podcast, as opposed to, hey, would you like to hire me? I mean, it's just a way easier email to send, right? And it's all about relationship building over the long term.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it gives you the permission to reach out to people you might not be comfortable with.
Well, because you're helping them, right? Yeah. I mean, ultimately.
You have something to offer, maybe. Awesome. Yeah. So I think the podcast download you guys have, you did kind of a excerpt of all the interviews you've done. You did a SlideShare PDF of that. And it was really useful because you could see people like Scott Monty and all of the great interviews you've done in one format, kind of a written word. Talk about that process and kind of like Jason Miller was talking about,
Exactly.
reusing that
yeah,
content.
what Jason was saying and what Chris Mitty was saying, a little bit what I said here this afternoon, that concept of atomizing, and one of the goals for the company this year is to make Social Pros more of a brand, more so than just a podcast, because I think it is a good brand and it has other potential other than just a podcast. So, okay, we've got to take this amazing raw material, which is 125 hour-long interviews. How can we take that and make something more out of it? And so we came up with this idea called the Social Pros All-Stars, where we created a slide share that looks like baseball cards. And so for each of our participants, Jessica Jolio from Duncan was one, and Lauren from PGA Tour and a few other folks, we actually have in a baseball card format their employment history and their education history, and we have them on the cover like a baseball card with a Social Pros baseball cap on. And what we found, and we didn't really know what was going to happen, but when we started to investigate, we found that there's all these really interesting patterns of people's educational background. Like almost nobody has a business background, a lot of journalism background people. You think about
a lot of good writers.
The original Days of Social, a lot of good writers, exactly, storytellers, and kind of where people went to school, and a lot of agency, refugees, that kind of thing. So
I like
it
that,
ended up being
agency
a really interesting project, and we'll probably do another one of them.
I like the agency refugees. That's a good hashtag, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Paula Berg once yelled at me for not warning her about timesheets at agencies.
Yeah, she stepped right into it.
Okay, so the reusing content's really great. I think you're a great content marketer. I mean, you obviously educate people well, but outside of the blog, outside of the podcast, you're an author. The utility book came out, which I loved the read. It was a really educational book. I think a lot of people try to write books that are not nearly as useful right away as that one is.
Thank you.
And I loved when you spelled out not only how you marketed the book, but how you wrote the book, because it was very unique. Can you talk about that process?
Yeah, it was different. And I should also just a quick plug. I am writing Utility for Real Estate right now, which is about a 65-page ebook. It'll be on Kindle and Nook in the fall. And I'm writing it with Erica Campbell, who was a speaker yesterday from Homes.com. She and I are co-authoring that. So I'm really delighted to work on that with her.
And for people that haven't read Utility, it's just a great book talking about how you need to be useful with your marketing and actually teach people things and how much value you'll get back out of that.
Thank you. What happened was let's see, I gotta get my math right here. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. It was the very first Content Marketing World, and Joe Palizzi, who runs that event, said, hey, would you like to do like an 8-minute burst session, almost like a TED Talk, but even shorter? And I said, yeah, okay. And he said, what are you going to talk about? I said, I don't know. And that summer, I was in Canada with my family. My son's a hockey player, and we were in Banff, Alberta, and I found this guy, Taxi Mike, who had this really interesting utility program where he creates this directory of where to eat in town, and he prints it out and gives it around to all the town. I'm like, wow, that's really fascinating that he's doing this, and it really doesn't tie back to his business directly, but indirectly it's brilliant. I'm like, wow. I said, I wonder if there's other people that are really engaging in that kind of marketing, and it planted the seed. And from that summer till that September or October, whenever the event was, I started to see other examples. Hilton Suggests is one that's in the book that's kind of famous now. And I'm like, wow, maybe there's like a trend here. And so I did an 8-minute session about utility. And I was in the shower, and the name just came to me. And I did an 8-minute session about utility at Content Marketing World, the first one, and it was really successful. And I'm like, wow, people really like that. Maybe I should build it out into a full keynote. And so I did a 60-minute keynote of it, took it on the road, and people really liked it. And then I ended up getting a book deal to write it. And I wrote the book essentially based on the keynote. So it was a speech first, and then a book, which is one of the reasons why I think compared to a lot of other business books, it has a strong narrative flow to it because it was a speech first. So if anybody's thinking about writing a book, and I suspect some of you are, I really recommend that you do that. Write it as a speech first, and then take that and use that as the bones of the book.
And transcribe the talk.
Yeah, and transcribe the talk. Obviously I had to flesh it out a lot more, but it gives you a really nice spine for the flow of the book.
Yeah, I think that's valuable because I think it makes it more approachable to almost being an author. Because I think people like the idea of I can do a presentation, I can do a great presentation, and that'll give me an actual gateway into it. Yeah,
agreed.
All right, so we have time for a couple more questions. I'm going to wrap this up, and then we'll give away the tickets just to give you guys an idea of where the timing is. But one of the things that you've done fairly recently in your career is you actually moved your family to Indiana.
Yeah.
And I loved the process. Again, you're great at sharing these things. You did almost like a data dive to decide where to live in the country.
Yeah, I actually talked about it in the utility book. One of the principles of utility is self-serve information, right? The fact that everybody is online now, especially this audience, that you have to produce more and more information. And my wife and I decided that we wanted to maybe live somewhere else. I'd been in Arizona for 40 years and kind of like been there, done that. And so we put together a list of things that we cared about, attributes, and cost of living and climate and location and close to an airport and things like that. And we went to some websites. The one I remember the best is called bestplaces.net. And you can rank order the attributes that you care about, and it will spit out, you should live here. Not like a BuzzFeed quiz. It's more like legit than that, somewhat more legit than that.
You should live in Paris.
Yeah, you should live in Hawaii. You're a Capricorn. So it was more than that. And it kept saying, like, we kept doing all these searches, and it kept saying Bloomington, Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana. And I'd never been to Bloomington. I'd been to Indianapolis a few times because we've worked with Exact Target for a long time. And so I'd been to Indianapolis, but never Bloomington. I only knew it from the movie Breaking Away, which some of you who are older may remember. And I said, well, that's interesting, but hey, I'm an internet guy for 20 years. Like, who am I to argue with a relational database? So we said, yeah, fuck it. Let's just get in the car. Or actually, we got on the plane, and we flew to Bloomington and found a realtor online, same kind of situation, and spent like 4 days there. We're like, yeah, we love this, and packed up the family and moved.
That's awesome.
It was really weird because I didn't know a single person, and I had my family, my wife's family, all my friends, my business, all my clients. 100% of my life was in Arizona, and we just sort of turned our back, and it was really super scary. And a lot of people, including people who are really close to me, are like, you are insane. You are insane. But my business has grown 500% in the 4 years since I moved.
Wow.
And part of it's because when you take yourself out of any sort of comfort zone, in my case, it was a geographical comfort zone. When you take yourself out of your comfort zone, it forces you to think on a different plane, a different horizon.
Yeah.
And so me moving to a place where I didn't know anybody forced me to go from a prominent digital marketing person in Arizona to a nobody has ever heard of me digital marketing person in America, but now people have heard of me in America, right?
Yeah.
But I never would have had the courage to do all the things I've done in the last few years if I hadn't have sort of changed my perspective. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I forget where it was, but I read something that exactly what you said, breaking out of the comfort zone into what they call the learning zone.
Yeah.
It's in between the comfort and the panic zone. There's that area where you push yourself a little bit and you find you can really grow.
Yep.
All right, last question. You recently were named, we love lists, internet lists are great. You recently were named the most quotable person on the internet for, I believe, small businesses or businesses. And I think
marketers, maybe.
I don't really care about the list because I think you are just super quotable and you're great at creating phrases, utility, great phrase,
Thank
right?
you.
And you're great at creating, social media is gasoline on the fire, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you is this just an innate thing you were born with, like coming out of the womb, or do you have tips of how people can kind of capture that for their own business, for their own personal brand, that type of direction?
I've been a writer for a long, long time. I was a writer first. I was a journalism major for a while. I was really involved in journalism as a younger person. So I think that helps a little bit. In fact, my mom has like 14,000 master's degrees in English, and that helps. I would get like my hand slapped for using hanging, participles in sentences as a child. So that helps, being around language and having language emphasized in my life. But I always think about if this takes more than a sentence to say it differently.
You're gonna
right?
lose somebody,
So for me, I was always like that. And then all of a sudden Twitter comes along and I'm like, oh my God, they built technology to allow me to allow me to say this the way I've been saying it the whole time. And you'll see all my presentations, most of my presentations in the book and even what I do in the blog, I try to purposefully communicate in short bursts like that. It just works. It's more memorable.
Yeah.
That's why I love Canva and things like that, because now you can take those same kind of quotes and put graphics around it easily and get it out there. So
Awesome.
it definitely works.
Excellent. One more round of applause for Jay Baer.
Thanks, everybody.